He was the billionaire CEO, the king of a corporate empire forged in ice and ambition. And her? The new intern, just another anonymous face in the crowd. Their story should have been simple, but in a single meeting, he turned her into a public spectacle of humiliation. An act of cruelty that would seal both their fates forever. But what that arrogant CEO didn't know, was that the woman he had just destroyed was the secret daughter of the man who owned it all. Have you ever felt invisible? Have you ever felt the sting of injustice, the bitter taste of being underestimated by someone who doesn't even know your worth? That feeling of powerlessness is a poison, and today's story begins with a lethal dose of it. The journey of Frances Spencer and Terrance Banks isn't just a romance, it's a silent war waged in the halls of power, in the dark corners of a broken heart, and in the desperate search for redemption. Get ready for an emotional roller coaster. A story where a secret identity is the most powerful weapon and true love is the only salvation. What happens when the man who humiliated you discovers that his destiny is, quite literally, in your hands? The stakes couldn't be higher. We're talking about intense drama, a love story born from conflict, and a plot twist so shocking it will make you question everything. This isn't just another rich man poor woman tale. It's a reminder that sometimes, the quietest people have the strongest souls. If you're ready for this breathtaking journey, become part of our community. Comment below with the word vindication if you believe in shocking comebacks. Like this video as a sign of support for Frances. And of course, subscribe and hit the bell, because you won't want to miss a single second of this life-changing story. The air in the main conference room was more than just chilled, it was crystalline, sharp enough to cut through the nervous energy of the assembled executives. At the head of the monolithic marble table sat Terrance Banks, a CEO whose presence was less a matter of position and more a force of nature. His gaze swept across the room, a silent indictment of mediocrity, making even the most senior vice presidents shrink in their $1,000 suits. This was his kingdom, a corporate empire built on ruthless efficiency, and today, a new sacrifice was about to be made at its altar. Among the polished figures was a stark anomaly: Frances Spencer, the new intern. She sat slightly apart from the main group, her notepad clutched in her hands like a shield against the intimidating corporate grandeur. She was here to learn, to absorb, to prove that she belonged based on her own merit, not the powerful family connection she so carefully concealed. For her, this meeting was a chance, a door into a world she was determined to conquer on her own terms, completely unaware she was about to be made an example of. "Ms. Spencer," Terrance's voice boomed, devoid of any warmth, shattering the silence. "The marketing projections for the Kensington project. Enlighten us." It wasn't a request, it was a challenge, a loaded gun placed in her inexperienced hands. Frances, startled, began to present her initial findings, her voice quiet but steady. She was halfway through her second point when he cut her off, a cruel smirk playing on his lips, a clear sign that the real test, the one designed for her to fail, was about to begin. He dismantled her analysis piece by piece, not with constructive criticism, but with surgical disdain. He twisted her words, belittled her efforts, and painted her as a naive child playing in an adult's world. The public humiliation was profound, a slow, agonizing dissection in front of the very people she hoped to impress. The room fell into a heavy, uncomfortable silence. No one dared to meet her eyes, nor the cold, unforgiving gaze of their CEO. He was making a point weakness would be publicly and brutally excised. But as the waves of shame washed over her, something deep within Frances held firm. She refused to let the tears fall, to give him the satisfaction of her breaking. This was a painful, searing lesson, but it was also a test of a different kind. Her secret identity was a trump card she could have played, a word to her father that would have ended his career. But her vindication had to be earned. She had to prove him wrong, not with her name, but with her will. From his elevated position, Terrance saw only what he wanted to see: a floundering intern, another validation of his harsh but, in his mind, necessary methods. He felt no remorse, only the cold calculus of power. In his world, you either inspired fear or you were consumed by it, and he was a master of its inspiration. This drama was just another Tuesday, another pawn sacrificed to fortify the king. He was the unquestionable billionaire ruler of this domain. Yet, this moment was not an ending, but a volatile beginning. The echo of his cruelty would linger in the sterile air, planting a seed of consequence that would grow into a life-changing story. This act of calculated dominance was the first, unsuspecting move in a complex game of hearts, a game where the underestimated intern held all the power, and the mighty CEO had just made the mistake of his life, setting in motion a plot twist he would never see coming. To understand Terrance Banks, one had to understand his philosophy: business was a battlefield, not a family. Every employee, from the boardroom to the mailroom, was a soldier, a resource to be deployed, managed, and if necessary, sacrificed for the greater good of the empire. Sentiment was a liability, a rust that corroded the gears of progress and profit. His emotional world was a fortress, with walls so high and thick that no one could ever get close enough to see the man inside. He was the CEO, a title that was also his shield. His days were a testament to this ruthless creed, a series of calculated decisions devoid of human complication. He could fire a 20-year veteran with the same detached efficiency as he would discontinue a failing product line. He saw their pleas and their service not as a sign of loyalty, but as a weakness he couldn't afford to entertain. In his mind, the company was a living entity, and its survival superseded the careers or feelings of the individuals who composed it. It was a brutal, but simple, truth he lived by. He viewed kindness as a currency for the weak, a tool for manipulation rather than a genuine expression. He saw his employees as pawns on a grand chessboard, their personal lives and ambitions nothing more than irrelevant background noise to his strategic maneuvers. This billionaire had built his world on the bedrock of control, and emotions were the one variable he could not quantify or command. Therefore, they were to be ignored, in himself and in others, creating a sterile and lonely existence at the very top. This emotional armor had been forged in the fires of a difficult past, a history that taught him trust was a luxury and vulnerability was a fatal flaw. He had fought his way to the top with nothing but his own intellect and relentless drive, and he expected the same from everyone around him.
He wasn't just a boss, he was a crucible, designed to burn away the impurities of weakness and sentimentality from all who worked for him, leaving only the strongest and most resilient behind. His personal life was just as guarded, a series of superficial interactions that never breached the perimeter of his heart. He was a rich man, surrounded by people, yet utterly alone, a silent observer of a world he commanded but never truly connected with. The idea of a true love story was, to him, a fiction, a fairy tale for those who lacked the strength to face the world on their own. His reality was one of power, profit, and the cold, solitary weight of his crown. He saw the intern Frances not as a person but as a symbol. She represented the untempered, idealistic newcomer who needed to be hardened or broken. His public takedown of her was, in his clinical assessment, a necessary part of that process. He was not being cruel, he was being efficient, shaping a new piece of his corporate machine. Or, if she couldn't handle the pressure, proving she was a faulty part that needed to be discarded without a second thought. Thus, Terrance Banks moved through his world, a brilliant and powerful enigma, emotionally isolated by his own design. He was the architect of a grand corporate destiny, completely unaware that his carefully constructed world was about to be shaken to its foundations by the one person he saw as the most insignificant pawn on the board. The drama he so expertly controlled was about to become deeply and uncomfortably personal, challenging the very core of his being. In stark contrast to the cold, metallic world of Terrance Banks, Frances Spencer existed in a space defined by warmth and quiet resolve. She was a walking embodiment of the rich man, poor woman trope. But with a life-changing twist, she chose her poverty as a badge of honor. She lived in a modest apartment, rode the subway to work, and found joy in simple things, all while being the sole heiress to a multi-billion-dollar fortune. Her life was an exercise in carefully concealing the immense power she held. Her determination to succeed on her own merits was the driving force behind this elaborate charade. She had seen how the way of her family name changed people, how it warped perceptions and created a barrier of sycophants and opportunists. All she wanted was to be seen for herself, for her mind, her work ethic, her character. This internship wasn't just a job, it was a pilgrimage to discover her own worth, far from the long shadow cast by her father's empire and her secret identity. Frances possessed a kindness that was not a weakness, but a quiet, unshakable strength. She was a colleague who would stay late to help with a deadline, the one who remembered your coffee order, the person who listened with genuine empathy. She saw the humanity in the corporate machine, the individual stories behind the job titles. Her humility wasn't an act, it was a core of her being, a trait that made her both underestimated and uniquely powerful in a world that mistook kindness for naivety. Her father, the chairman, had reluctantly agreed to her undercover mission, understanding her need to forge her own path. He respected her integrity, even as he worried about the harsh realities of the world she was stepping into, especially under a CEO as notoriously ruthless as Terrance Banks. He trusted his daughter's resilience, knowing her heart-touching spirit was her greatest asset, a secret weapon in a world that valued aggression over compassion, something that would surely be put to the test. After the public humiliation in the boardroom, Frances could have been broken. Instead, her resolve hardened. The sting of Terrance's words was a painful reminder of why she was doing this. It fueled her desire not for revenge, but for vindication. She would not be defined by his arrogant dismissal. She would prove her value through her actions, through the quality of her work, showing him and everyone else that her worth had nothing to do with her last name or her bank account. She moved through the office with an unassuming grace, observing, learning, and absorbing everything, while others jockeyed for position and played political games. She focused on the work itself. Her unassuming nature made her almost invisible, allowing her to see the true dynamics of the company, the hidden currents of fear and ambition that flow beneath the surface. She was a quiet observer, gathering knowledge that would prove to be far more valuable than anyone could imagine. And so, Frances Spencer, the secret billionaire intern, began her journey. She was a puzzle that no one at the company, least of all its brilliant but emotionally blind CEO, had the first clue how to solve. She was a walking plot twist, a humble force of nature about to collide with an immovable object, setting the stage for a drama that would redefine the meaning of power, success, and the true nature of an emotional connection. Terrance Banks, still viewing Frances through the lens of his own cynical worldview, decided to escalate his test. He believed her survival of the public shaming was a fluke, and now it was time to expose her incompetence through a different, more definitive method. He summoned her to his office, the vast, intimidating space that offered a panoramic view of the city he had conquered, and assigned her a project that was, by all accounts, completely and utterly impossible. The task was a poisoned chalice, a comprehensive market analysis and strategic proposal for a struggling subsidiary, a project that stumped entire teams of seasoned analysts for months. He gave her a laughable deadline of just 1 week and offered her no team, no resources, and no guidance. It was a perfectly designed failure, a way to quietly and efficiently push her out of the company. In his mind, he was simply expediting the inevitable, confirming his initial judgment of her as nothing more than a naive intern. But Terrance had profoundly underestimated his opponent. Frances didn't complain or show any signs of despair. She simply accepted the task with a quiet, "Thank you, sir," and walked out. For her, this wasn't a punishment, it was the opportunity she had been waiting for. It was a chance to dive deep, to use her intellect and untraditional way of thinking without the constraints of corporate groupthink. The impossible project was her perfect canvas, a stage for her to prove her worth. She worked with silent, ferocious intensity. The office became her home as she pored over data, made calls to low-level employees that executives always ignored, and pieced together a narrative that everyone else had missed. She wasn't just looking at numbers, she was looking for the story, the human element behind the failing subsidiary. Her approach was holistic and empathetic, a stark contrast to the cold, data-driven strategies the company usually employed. This was her unique brand of intelligence at work. The day of the deadline arrived. Frances walked into Terrance's office, not with a look of defeat, but with a calm confidence. She placed a surprisingly slim, yet dense, report on his desk. Terrance fully expected a mess of excuses and incomplete work. He was prepared to deliver his final, dismissive verdict. He casually opened the report, his expression a mask of bored indifference. ready to put this chapter and this intern behind him for good. As he began to read, however, his expression slowly changed. The boredom was replaced by a flicker of surprise, which then morphed into something else entirely: intrigue. Her analysis was brilliant, not just in its data, but in its insight. She had identified the core problem not as a market failure, but as a human-only disconnect between management and the workforce. Her proposed solution was unconventional, audacious, and utterly compelling. It was a shocking and unexpected outcome. He looked up from a report, seeing her for the first time not as an intern, but as an enigma. She had taken his impossible task and delivered exceptional results, all without a single complaint. This quiet, unassuming woman had defied his expectations in every conceivable way. A seed of curiosity was planted in the barren ground of his mind. Who was Frances Spencer, and what other surprises did she have in store? This was a plot twist in his carefully managed world. Frances' unexpected success did not go unnoticed, but the attention it garnered was not all positive. A mid-level manager named Mark, a man whose ambition far outstripped his talent, saw her sudden rise as a direct threat. He had been angling for a promotion for years, and the idea of being upstaged by a mere intern was a bitter pill to swallow. His jealousy quickly festered into something more malicious, a desire to knock her down a peg and reclaim what he felt was his rightful place in the corporate spotlight. Mark saw an opportunity when Frances was tasked with organizing the logistics for a major client presentation, a direct result of her recent triumph. The project required meticulous coordination, and any mistake would reflect poorly on her and potentially jeopardize a multi-million-dollar account. While pretending to offer his assistance and mentorship, Mark subtly began to sabotage her work. He accidentally deleted key files, changed meeting times without notice, and provided her with incorrect contact information for critical vendors. The sabotage was clever, a series of small, deniable mistakes designed to create a cascade of failure. A less composed person would have panicked, pointing fingers and creating a scene. But Frances, sensing the undercurrent of hostility, chose a different path. Her unwavering integrity became her shield and her weapon. Instead of accusing Mark, she simply redoubled her efforts, staying up all night to recover the lost data and personally calling every contact to reconfirm the details, absorbing the blame for the mix-ups herself. Her colleagues, however, were not blind. They saw her tireless work ethic and her refusal to cast blame. They had also witnessed Mark's slick, insincere offers of help and noticed a pattern of bad luck that seemed to follow Frances whenever he was near. Her quiet resilience and refusal to engage in petty office politics earned her their silent but profound respect. They started to see her not just as intelligent, but as a person of true character, a rarity in their competitive world. The day of the presentation arrived, and thanks to Frances' Herculean efforts, it went off without a hitch. The clients were impressed, and the account was secured. In the debriefing meeting, the head of the department praised a seamless execution, and Mark was quick to take a portion of the credit. But then, a senior colleague quietly spoke up, detailing the unfortunate series of technical glitches and commending Frances for single-handedly pulling it all together against the odds. The implication was subtle, but clear to everyone in the room. Terrance, who was present at the debriefing, listened to this exchange with a growing sense of awareness. He was a master at reading corporate dynamics, and he instantly understood the unspoken drama that had played out. He saw Mark's false modesty and the genuine respect in the eyes of the other team members as they looked at Frances. He was forced to notice her again, not just for her intelligence, but for the quiet strength of her character. It was another shocking piece of the puzzle. This incident did more than just solidify her reputation among her peers. It forced Terrance to reevaluate his initial assessment once more. He had designed a world to break people like her, but she was not breaking. Instead, she was turning every attack, every obstacle, into a demonstration of her integrity and strength. The underestimated intern was proving to be far more resilient than he could have ever imagined, a fact that both annoyed and deeply intrigued the emotionally guarded CEO. The days that followed were filled with a new, unspoken tension. Terrance found himself watching Frances, not with the critical eye of a CEO assessing an employee, but with the curiosity of a scientist who has discovered a new, unexplainable phenomenon. He maintained his cold, distant exterior, But his mind was working overtime, trying to reconcile the humble intern with the brilliant, resilient woman who consistently defied his expectations. He was starting to see that there was more to her than met the eye. One evening, as he was making a final round through the near-empty office, he heard the faint sound of voices coming from a small break room. He paused, hidden by the shadows of the hallway, and peered inside. There he saw Frances with a junior accountant named Sarah, who was visibly distressed, tears streaming down her face as she spoke of a difficult personal situation. Terrance's first instinct was to dismiss it as unprofessional, a distraction from the work that needed to be done. But he didn't move. He watched as Frances listened with a profound, unwavering empathy. She didn't offer empty platitudes or corporate speak. Instead, she spoke to Sarah with a genuine kindness, sharing a story of her own past struggle and offering tangible, practical help. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated compassion, completely devoid of any personal gain. She was simply one human being showing profound kindness to another who was struggling, a heart-touching moment of pure grace. For a man like Terrance, who viewed every interaction as a transaction, this act of pure altruism was a foreign concept. He saw no angle, no hidden motive. It was a moment of shocking simplicity and emotional honesty. He secretly observed this exchange, feeling like an intruder on sacred ground. The cynical worldview he had so carefully constructed over decades began to show its first real cracks. He was witnessing a strength that had nothing to do with power or profit, and it was utterly disarming. He slipped away before they could see him, retreating to the sterile safety of his office. But the image was seared into his mind. The memory of her gentle words and Sarah's grateful sob was a dissonant note in the cold, efficient symphony of his life. It began to chip away at the fortress he had built around his heart, a single ray of warmth penetrating the icy defenses. This was a life-changing observation for the hardened billionaire. This secret observation marked a pivotal shift in the drama between them. His intrigue was no longer purely intellectual. It was becoming personal. He started to see that her kindness wasn't a sign of weakness, as he had always believed, but a different kind of power altogether, a power that could heal, connect, and inspire. It was a power he did not possess, and for the first time in a very long time, a power he found himself inexplicably drawn to. The underestimated intern had, without even knowing it, launched the most effective assault on his cynical worldview imaginable. She hadn't used logic or ambition, but a simple act of human empathy. The CEO, the ruthless king of the corporate world, was beginning to question the very foundations of his empire, all because of a quiet, heart-touching moment he was never meant to see. A true, unspoken romance was beginning to bloom in the most unlikely of circumstances. The bond forged in unspoken moments was about to be tested in a crucible of high-stakes corporate drama. Terrance, in a rare moment of oversight driven by immense pressure from the board, had made a critical miscalculation in the financial modeling for a major upcoming acquisition. It was a subtle error buried deep within hundreds of pages of data, but it was an error with the potential to cost the company millions, a mistake that could tarnish his flawless reputation and give his rivals the ammunition they needed. Frances, assigned to cross-reference the appendix documents of the deal, stumbled upon the discrepancy. Her blood ran cold as she triple-checked the figures, the gravity of the situation settling upon her like a physical weight. She held in her hands a corporate bomb. She could leak it to a board member, expose him publicly, and achieve the ultimate vindication for the humiliation she had endured. It would be a shocking act of revenge, a perfect plot twist that would make her an instant legend in the company. For a moment, she considered it. The memory of his cold, dismissive words in that first meeting was still a fresh wound. But then, she thought of the other moments, his flicker of surprise at her report, the unspoken respect after the sabotage incident, and the profound kindness she had seen in him, however fleeting. Exposing him felt wrong. It wasn't who she was. Her goal was to prove her own worth, not to build her success on the ruins of another's, even his. Choosing the path of integrity, she devised a plan. Instead of exposing the error, she worked through the night, preparing a supplementary report of stress tests on the data which subtly highlighted the flawed variable and proposed a corrected model. She framed it not as a discovery of his mistake, but as an additional layer of due diligence. It was a masterful move, allowing him to save face while still correcting the potentially disastrous error before it was too late for the company. She requested a brief, private meeting with him the next morning under the guise of a query about the project. She calmly presented her supplementary report. Her explanation focused solely on the data and the potential market volatilities. She never once mentioned the word mistake or hinted at his oversight. She simply presented the solution, giving him the credit for inspiring her to dig deeper into the numbers. It was an act of profound professional grace and loyalty. Terrance listened, his face an unreadable mask, but his mind was racing. He recognized the error instantly, and he knew with absolute certainty that she knew he had made it. He understood the monumental bullet she had just caught for him. He saw the power she held in that moment and the incredible restraint she had shown by not using against him. He was simultaneously humbled and utterly astonished by her character, a shocking display of loyalty from the intern he had once so carelessly humiliated. He accepted the report with a simple, quiet "Thank you, Ms. Spencer. This is excellent work." But the words were heavy with unspoken meaning. In that moment, the dynamic between the CEO and the intern was irrevocably altered. A new unspoken bond was forged between them, built not on words, but on a shared secret and a profound act of loyalty. The drama had shifted from a battle of wills to a fragile, burgeoning alliance, deepening the complexity of their evolving love story. The corrected acquisition deal was a massive success, and the company was celebrating. Yet, for Terrance and Frances, the victory was secondary to the new, fragile connection that now existed between them. The intense pressure of the deal had forced them into a silent partnership, and they found themselves working late together more frequently, poring over documents in the quiet hum of the deserted office. The formal barriers of their roles as CEO and intern began to dissolve in the late-night hours. One particular night, as they were surrounded by stacks of paperwork and fueled by lukewarm coffee, a wave of exhaustion seemed to hit Terrance all at once. For the first time, Frances saw past the billionaire titan and glimpsed the weary man beneath. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples, the invincible mass of command slipping to reveal a deep-seated fatigue. The silence in the room was no longer professional. It was personal and expectant. He started to talk, his voice lower than she had ever heard it, almost a whisper. He spoke not of profits or projections, but of the immense, crushing weight of responsibility, the loneliness of making decisions that affected thousands of lives. He shared a brief, unguarded story about a past business failure that had almost destroyed him, a moment of vulnerability so raw and unexpected it left Frances breathless. He was letting her see behind the curtain, into the heart of the emotionally guarded man. Frances didn't offer advice or judgment. She simply listened, her presence a calm and steady anchor in the storm of his confession. She understood the language of pressure, the burden of hidden identities and unspoken expectations. In that shared moment of quiet understanding, she saw him not as the arrogant CEO who had humiliated her, but as a complex, flawed, and profoundly lonely human being. It was a heart-touching and life-changing glimpse into his soul, a side of him he showed to no one. When he finished, a comfortable silence settled between them. He looked at her, his eyes filled with raw emotion. She couldn't quite name gratitude, relief, something deeper. "No one knows that," he said softly, and the admission hung in the air, a testament to the trust he had just placed in her. In that moment, they were not boss and intern, rich man and poor woman. They were just Terrance and Frances, two people finding a surprising and emotional connection in the solitude of a late-night work session. This was a turning point in their love story, the moment professional drama transformed into a deeply personal romance. The unspoken bond had finally been given a voice, however quiet. The shared vulnerability had created an intimacy that months of professional interaction never could. It was a shocking and profound shift, a testament to the power of a single moment of genuine human connection to change the trajectory of two lives forever. As they finally packed up to leave in the pre-dawn hours, the air was thick with new, unspoken promise. The connection between them was no longer just about work or secrets. It was about something real and tangible, something that terrified and exhilarated them both. The CEO had let his guard down, and in doing so, had opened the door to a relationship that would defy all logic and convention. setting the stage for both true love and unimaginable heartbreak. Just as the fragile blossom of trust began to open between Terrance and Frances, the snake in the garden was preparing to strike. The jealous manager, Mark, had been watching their growing rapport with a venomous envy. He saw Frances not as a colleague, but as an obstacle who had effortlessly gained the access and respect he so desperately craved. Consumed by his bitterness, he concocted a diabolical plan, not just to oust her, but to utterly destroy her reputation and, by extension, her budding relationship with the CEO. Mark knew the company was in the final stages of developing a revolutionary new product, a project shrouded in the utmost secrecy. The design schematics were the company's crown jewels, and any leak would be catastrophic. He saw his opening. Leveraging his system privileges, he meticulously began to construct a trail of fake evidence, a digital spiderweb designed to perfectly entrap Frances. It was a plot twist born of pure, unadulterated malice, a shocking betrayal in the making. First, he created a series of encrypted emails from a fake account, making it look like Frances was communicating with a key engineer at their biggest rival. He used phrasing and details it overheard her use, making the messages chillingly authentic. Then, late one night, he used a stolen password to access the secure server from her workstation, downloading the confidential design files. The final touch was orchestrating a small, anonymous wire transfer to an offshore account he had secretly set up in her name. The trap was set, a masterpiece of corporate espionage. Every piece of evidence was believable, logical, and damning. From the outside, it would look like a clear-cut case of an ambitious intern selling out the company for a quick payday. Mark had crafted a narrative that played perfectly into the cynical view of the world. He knew people like Terrance Banks held that everyone has a price, and loyalty is just a commodity to be bought and sold. With the evidence perfectly in place, Mark anonymously tipped off the head of security. The discovery of the leak sent shockwaves through the company's executive floor. An immediate, high-level investigation was launched, and it didn't take long for the carefully laid breadcrumbs to lead directly to one person, Frances Spencer. The name of the unassuming intern was suddenly on everyone's lips, linked to the most damaging act of betrayal in the company's history. Terrance was informed immediately. The news hit him like a physical blow, a vicious one-two punch of professional catastrophe and profound personal betrayal. The man who had just begun to dismantle the walls around his heart was suddenly faced with what appeared to be irrefutable proof that his vulnerability had been a catastrophic mistake. The woman he had started to trust, to admire, to feel something deeply emotional for, was seemingly a corporate spy. The perfectly believable trail of fake evidence was more than just a frame-up. It was a weapon designed to exploit Terrance's deepest fears about trust and intimacy. Mark hadn't just framed Frances for a crime, he had framed her as the embodiment of everything Terrance believed was wrong with the world. The stage was now set for a devastating confrontation, one that would shatter reputations, break hearts, and push their love story to the brink of utter destruction. The rage that consumed Terrance was volcanic. It wasn't just the anger of the CEO whose company had been betrayed. It was a searing, personal fury of a man who felt like a fool. The memory of their late-night conversation, his moment of shared vulnerability, now felt like a sick joke. He had allowed himself to trust her, to believe she was different, and this was his reward. His old, ruthless persona, the one that had protected him for so long, came roaring back to the surface as a violent defense mechanism. He didn't wait for a formal HR process or a private meeting. Fueled by a sense of betrayal that was almost unbearable, he stormed out of his office and onto the main departmental floor. He saw Frances at her desk, engrossed in her work, completely oblivious to the storm that was about to break over her head. To him, her calm demeanor was not a sign of innocence, but the chilling composure of a master manipulator, a shocking and infuriating sight. Frances Spencer. His voice was like a thunderclap, causing every head on the floor to snap in their direction. The entire department fell silent, the air crackling with tension. He strode towards her desk, the fabricated evidence clutched in his hand like a death warrant. His face was a mask of cold fury, his eyes burning with an accusatory fire that made her recoil. He felt a twisted need to make this punishment as public as the trust he had foolishly given her had been private. "You're fired," he spat, the words laced with venom. "You are a traitor and a liar." He threw the file of fake evidence down on her desk, the papers scattering. You came into my company and you sold us out. Get your things and get out of my sight. You are finished here." The public humiliation was a brutal echo of their first meeting, but magnified 1,000 times over. He wasn't just firing an intern, he was eviscerating a person he had almost allowed himself to love. Frances was speechless, completely blindsided. She looked from the papers to his face, her expression a mixture of shock, confusion, and a deep, shattering hurt. "Terrance, I don't understand. I didn't do this," she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. But he refused to listen, seeing her pleas as just another layer of her deception. He had been a fool to believe in her, and his fury was as much at himself as it was at her. This drama was his to control. Her reputation, so carefully built on integrity and hard work, was shattered in an instant. Her colleagues stared, a mixture of shock and suspicion on their faces. The man she had started to fall for, the man who had shown her his vulnerable side, was now the one publicly branding her a criminal. The emotional whiplash was devastating, a life-changing moment of absolute heartbreak. He had not only fired her, he had publicly declared that his brief flicker of faith in her was a mistake. Escorted by security, Frances walked through the silent office, the weight of 100 pairs of eyes on her back. The trust that had been so carefully nurtured between them had been utterly annihilated by a perfectly executed lie. Terrance stood watching her go, his heart a cold, hard knot in his chest. He had restored order, reasserted his authority, and rebuilt the walls around his heart. But as she disappeared from view, all he felt was a profound and hollow emptiness. The world that Frances stepped into after leaving the building was gray and indistinct, a reflection of the utter devastation in her soul. It wasn't a loss of the job that broke her, it was a complete and total annihilation of his faith in her. The man who had seen her intelligence, her character, and even a glimpse of her heart, had looked at a pile of papers and chosen to believe the worst. That betrayal was a wound far deeper than any public humiliation. In her modest apartment, she sat in a stunned silence, the events of the day replaying in her mind. Her first instinct was to fight, to scream her innocence from the rooftops. She had the ultimate weapon at her disposal, her secret identity. A single phone call to her father, the chairman, would not only clear her name instantly, but would likely bring Terrance's career to a screeching halt. The power to unleash a shocking vindication was right at her fingertips. But she couldn't bring herself to make the call. What would it prove? It would prove she was the chairman's daughter, not that she was innocent. Her name would be clear by virtue of her powerful connection, not by the truth or by his faith in her. He would be forced to believe her because of who she was, not what she had done, or more importantly, what she hadn't. The very thought felt like a hollow victory, a validation of the one thing she had fought so hard to escape. Her heart ached with a profound sense of loss. She had truly started to believe in the possibility of something real with Terrance. She had seen beyond the billionaire CEO and connected with the man inside. For him to believe she was capable of such a cheap and soulless betrayal was an indictment of everything she thought they had built. His lack of faith was the ultimate rejection, and it left her feeling utterly heartbroken and alone, her love story ending in a tragedy. So, Frances made a decision. She would not use her secret identity. She would not fight. If the man she had given her trust could not see the truth of her character, then there was nothing left worth fighting for in that world. Her quest to succeed on her own merits had ended in this catastrophic failure, and the pain of it was too much to bear. She needed to disappear, to heal, to find herself again, far away from the corporate drama that had so thoroughly broken her spirit. She packed a single bag, turned off her phone, and left her apartment key on the counter. She vanished completely, leaving no forwarding address, no note, no trace of where she was going. It was a silent act of defiance and self-preservation. She chose not to clear her name, but to preserve what was left of her own integrity, away from a world that had judged her so cruelly and so wrongly. Her disappearance was her final, heartbreaking statement. By choosing to vanish, Frances left behind a vacuum, a mystery that would slowly begin to eat away at the man who had cast her out. She had refused to play the game, to use the power she held. Instead, she simply removed herself from the board entirely, leaving behind a silence that would soon become far louder and more damning than any accusation she could have ever made. Her emotional journey had led her into exile, In the days and weeks that followed France's departure, a hollow victory echoed to the halls of Terrance's company. The traitor had been vanquished. Security protocols were tightened, and business returned to its relentless, unforgiving pace. Terrance projected an aura of cold, decisive control, the ruthless CEO firmly back in his element. But beneath the surface, a profound and unsettling disquiet began to take root in his soul, a feeling he couldn't shake no matter how many deals he closed. He tried to erase her from his mind, to file her away as a calculated risk that had gone bad, a lesson learned in the harshest way possible. But her ghost was everywhere. He saw her in the quiet determination of other junior employees. He heard her intelligent questions in strategy meetings. And late at night, in the solitude of his office, the memory of her kind, empathetic eyes haunted him. The emptiness she left behind was a palpable presence, a constant, silent accusation, a nagging sense of guilt, an emotion he had long since mastered and suppressed, began to gnaw at him. He found himself replaying their last conversation, her shocked and wounded expression, her desperate plea of innocence. At the time, he had seen it as an act. Now, he wasn't so sure. He remembered the woman who had saved him from a multi-million-dollar mistake, the one who had comforted a crying colleague when no one was watching. The two images of loyal, kind-hearted intern and the cold, calculating corporate spy simply did not reconcile. The feeling that he had made a terrible mistake grew from a whisper to a roar. It was an illogical, emotional response that went against every rational instinct he had. The evidence had been clear, irrefutable, and yet something felt wrong. A small, insignificant detail from security reported discrepancy in the login timestamp kept circling back in his mind. It was nothing, a minor glitch, but his gut, an instinct he had learned to trust in business, was telling him otherwise. Driven by this profound sense of loss and a growing, desperate need for the truth, Terrance made a decision. He could not let this go. He had to know for sure, not for the company, but for himself. He needed to either confirm his decision and silence the ghost of his guilt for good, or face the horrifying possibility that he had destroyed an innocent woman. This was no longer about a corporate drama. It was about his own potential for redemption. He began his own private investigation, a clandestine operation hidden from his own security team and executive board. Working late into the night, he started to pull at the threads of the case, using his own formidable intellect and resources to re-examine every piece of evidence. He became an undercover detective in his own company, driven by a force he didn't fully understand. He was a man possessed, searching for a truth he was terrified to find. This investigation was a penance, a journey into a truth he had been too angry and too hurt to see. The cold, hard billionaire CEO was slowly being replaced by a man riddled with doubt and a burgeoning sense of regret. He couldn't shake the feeling that in his haste to protect his heart, he had committed a grave injustice, and the thought that he had betrayed the one person who had shown him true kindness was a weight that was rapidly becoming too heavy to bear. Terrance's private investigation quickly consumed him. He became a man obsessed, poring over network logs, security footage, and financial records with a forensic intensity. He used his authority as CEO to access raw, unfiltered data that the initial investigation had overlooked. The deeper he dug, the more the perfect, believable case against Frances began to unravel, revealing subtle inconsistencies that pointed not to her guilt, but to a meticulously crafted frame-up. The first major break came when he analyzed the network traffic from her workstation on the night of the data breach. He discovered a ghost connection, a remote access protocol that had been cleverly masked to look like a direct login. It was a sophisticated hack, one that in turn would be highly unlikely to know how to execute, let alone conceal. This was the work of someone with deep system knowledge, someone with a high level of privilege. A shocking realization began to dawn on him. His suspicion immediately fell on Mark, the jealous manager. Terrance pulled every file, every email, every project Mark had ever been involved in. He discovered a pattern of subtle credit stealing and a history of quiet animosity towards rising stars in the department. Then he found the smoking gun, a deleted financial query from Mark's computer, made days before the leak, searching for untraceable offshore payment methods. It was a missing piece of the plot twist. The final confirmation came when Terrance hired an external cybersecurity firm. paying them handsomely out of his own pocket to trace the anonymous wire transfer. Within 48 hours, they had cracked the encryption, bypassing the offshore account and linking the funds directly back to a shell corporation owned by Mark's brother-in-law. The scheme was laid bare, a pathetic and vicious plot born of pure professional jealousy. The truth was a cold, hard slap in the face. The depth of his error hit Terrance with the force of a physical blow. He stared at the conclusive evidence on his screen, and all he could see was Frances' face, her eyes wide with shock and hurt as he publicly destroyed her. He had not just been wrong. He had been a blind, arrogant fool. He had allowed his own emotional wounds and cynical biases to be manipulated, and in doing so, he had betrayed the most genuine person he had ever known. The guilt was suffocating. His professional anger at the manager's scheme was completely overshadowed by a desperate, all-consuming need to find Frances. He had to tell her the truth. He had to look her in the eyes and beg for her forgiveness, even if he didn't deserve it. The thought that she was out there somewhere, alone, believing he was a monster he had pretended to be, was a torment he could no longer endure. His quest for redemption had begun. The billionaire CEO, the master of the universe, was now just a man humbled and broken by his own colossal mistake. He mobilized his vast resources, not for a corporate takeover, but for a deeply personal mission. He hired private investigators, tasked them with one single, urgent objective: find Frances Spencer. He was desperate to find her, not to fix a business problem, but to try and mend a heart he had so carelessly and unjustly shattered. The search for Frances was more difficult than Terrance could have ever imagined. She had vanished so completely, leaving behind no digital footprint, that even his high-priced investigators struggled for weeks. Finally, a single clue surfaced: a small, cash withdrawal from an ATM in a remote, quiet town hundreds of miles from the city. It was a place known for its tranquility, a perfect refuge for someone seeking to escape the world and heal a broken heart. Terrance didn't hesitate. He flew there himself, arriving in the small, picturesque town that felt like a different universe from his own concrete and glass kingdom. After days of showing her photograph to locals, he finally found her. She was working in a small, independent bookstore, surrounded by the quiet company of stories, a world away from the corporate drama she had left behind. When she saw him walk through the door, her face was not angry, but weary, her eyes holding a deep, guarded pain. His initial apology was clumsy, a torrent of explanations and regret that she listened to with a quiet, impenetrable stillness. She did not absolve him. She did not offer him the quick forgiveness he so desperately craved. She simply told him that the apology was for his conscience, not hers, and that she had moved on. Her polite dismissal was more cutting than any angry outburst could have been. It was clear that words would not be enough to earn his redemption. So Terrance stayed. He checked into a modest local inn, shedding the persona of the billionaire CEO. He began a quiet, persistent campaign to prove he had changed. He didn't try to win her over with grand gestures or expensive gifts he knew that would only push her further away. Instead, he focused on small, meaningful actions. He helped the elderly owner of the bookstore fix a leaky roof. He volunteered at the local animal shelter, something she was passionate about. He showed her through his actions that he was more than the arrogant man who had hurt her. He gave her space but made his presence known, a steady, patient force. He would leave her favorite coffee on the bookstore's doorstep in the morning. He wrote her letters, not of apology, but of his own journey of self-reflection, admitting the flaws in his character she had unknowingly exposed. He was fighting to prove that his feelings for her were real, that they were for Frances the person, not the intern, and that he was willing to do the hard work to become a man worthy of her. Slowly, heartbreakingly slowly, she began to see the change. She saw the genuine remorse in his eyes, the humility in his actions. She saw him interact with the townspeople not as a superior, but as a peer. This was not the rich man she knew. This was a man actively seeking vindication, not for his reputation, but for his soul. The ice around her heart began to thaw as she allowed herself to believe that this transformation, this emotional journey, might actually be real. Their love story began anew, not in a gleaming boardroom, but on the quiet streets of a small town. It was a romance built on the foundation of a painful past, but blossoming in the hope of a redeemed future. Terrance was no longer fighting for his company or his pride. He was fighting for a chance at true love. And for the first time, Francis started to believe he might just be worth the risk of a second chance. With a fragile, tentative truce established between them, Terrance knew there was one final act of redemption he had to perform. It wasn't enough to earn Francis' private forgiveness. He had to publicly restore the reputation he had so publicly destroyed. He asked her to return with him to the city, not as an employee, but as an honored guest, promising that he would make everything right, trusting him one last time. She agreed, her presence a silent testament to the progress he had made. Terrance called an emergency board meeting, including all senior executives and department heads of the very same audience that had witnessed Francis' humiliation. The air was thick with anticipation. He stood before them, not as the arrogant CEO they knew, but as a humbled leader. With a calm, unwavering voice, he began to lay out the entire, sordid affair, starting with his own misguided judgment, and ending with the conclusive evidence of Mark's malicious scheme. He publicly exposed the saboteur, detailing Mark's every deceitful action and presenting the irrefutable proof of the frame-up. Mark, who was in the room, crumbled under the weight of the evidence, his pathetic attempts at denial falling flat. Terrance fired him on the spot, not with anger, but with a cold, final authority. Then, he turned his attention to the most important part of his speech. He offered a profound, public apology to Francis, clearing her name completely and praising her unwavering integrity and character. As the room buzzed with this shocking revelation, the main doors of the conference room swung open. A distinguished, older man with an air of quiet authority walked in, his gaze sweeping across the stunned faces. It was the company's chairman, a figure rarely seen outside of the annual shareholders meeting. He walked slowly toward the head of the table, stopping beside a visibly moved Francis. The room fell into a dead, expectant silence. Sensing another plot twist was imminent, the chairman looked directly at a bewildered Terrance. He placed a gentle, fatherly hand on Francis' shoulder. A small, proud smile touched his lips as he addressed the CEO, his voice calm, but carrying an immense weight that commanded the attention of everyone present. "Mr. Banks," he said, the words echoing in the silent room, "I want to thank you for your diligence in this matter." He paused, letting the tension build, before delivering the final, life-changing line. "Thank you for finding my daughter." The collective gasp from the room was audible. Jaws dropped, eyes widened in disbelief. The quiet, underestimated intern who had been hired, humiliated, fired, and now exonerated was the secret heiress to the entire multi-billion-dollar corporation. The drama had reached its absolute peak. The secret identity was out, and the revelation was more shocking and impactful than anyone, especially the man at the center of it all, could have ever prepared for. Terrance stood frozen, his mind struggling to process the information. Every interaction, every moment, every piece of the puzzle that was Francis Spencer suddenly clicked into place with a stunning, breathtaking clarity. The rich man, poor woman narrative had been a lie. The power dynamic he thought he controlled had been an illusion from the very beginning. He was completely and utterly stunned, facing the biggest surprise of his life. In the chaotic aftermath of the chairman's bombshell announcement, the boardroom erupted in frantic whispers. The entire corporate hierarchy was reeling from the shock, trying to recalibrate their understanding of power. But Terrance Banks heard none of it. His world had narrowed to a single point: Francis, standing beside her father, her expression a complex mix of relief, apprehension, and quiet strength. The revelation of her secret identity, the fact that she was a billionaire heiress, was a tidal wave that should have changed everything. But in that moment of pure, stunning surprise, Terrance found incredible, life-changing clarity. He realized, with a certainty that resonated in his very soul, that her status meant nothing to him. The woman he had pursued, the woman he had fought for, the woman whose forgiveness he had begged for, was not the heiress standing before him now. It was a humble, kind-hearted, fiercely intelligent intern who had seen the good in him when he couldn't see it himself. Ignoring the gasp from the board and the powerful, expectant gaze of her father, Terrance took a step forward. He had to make one final, grand gesture, not a redemption, but pure, unadulterated love. This was his moment of vindication, a chance to prove that his transformation was real, and that his feelings were not tied to her power or her name. His heart, once so carefully guarded, was now completely and irrevocably open for all to see. "I didn't know," he said, his voice cutting through the noise, directed only at her. "And it doesn't matter." He walked towards her, his eyes locked on hers, creating an intimate island in the middle of the shocked room. "The woman I fell in love with wasn't the chairman's daughter. It wasn't a billionaire heiress." He paused, his voice thick with emotion. "I fell in love with Frances, the intern, the woman who showed me what integrity and kindness truly mean." He stopped directly in front of her, the world fading away. "I fell in love with you when I thought you had nothing," he continued, his voice raw and heart-touching. "And I am the one with nothing to offer you now, but the promise that I will spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of your heart." It was a stunning confession, a complete reversal of the rich man, poor woman dynamic, a declaration of true love that transcended status and wealth. Then, in front of her father, the board, and everyone who had witnessed their entire tumultuous drama, he got down on one knee. He had no ring, nothing but the sincerity of his words. "Frances Spencer," he said, his gaze unwavering, "will you give me a chance? A real chance to prove that the man I have become is the man you deserve?" It was the ultimate emotional climax to their unbelievable love story. The room held its breath. The fate of the CEO, the company, and a profound romance all rested on her answer. Frances looked down at the man kneeling before her, the arrogant CEO who had been humbled by his own heart, and a slow, beautiful smile spread across her face, tears of joy welling in her eyes. This was more than a plot twist. It was a testament to the life-changing power of love and forgiveness. Terrance and Frances' story is a powerful reminder that a person's true value is never what it appears to be on the surface. It shows us that real strength isn't found in a title or a bank account, but in unwavering integrity. And more importantly, it proves that even a heart thought to be made of stone can be completely transformed by the shocking and life-changing power of redemption and true love. If you also believe that kindness is a superpower and that everyone deserves a chance at vindication, then you've found your place. This is more than just a channel. It's a community for people like you. So, make sure you subscribe and officially join our family, where stories that touch the heart are the only thing that matters. Now let's make some noise. Like this video as a signal to the world that these are the kinds of stories that need to be told. In the comments below, answer this one. Emotional question: what was a single moment that you felt the story truly turned? Was it his act of redemption or her act of forgiveness? And finally, share this video with one person who needs to be reminded that their greatest chapter might just be a surprising plot twist away. And while you wait for what's next, know that our channel is a treasure chest of emotional journeys just like this one. Explore our older videos and discover other unforgettable stories that will move you. To make sure you don't miss any of the incredible new adventures we have yet to tell, activate that notification bell. You won't want to be left out of the next wave of emotion.